Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Dr. Bessent again. We are going to be talking in this episode all about your microbiome and your pet's microbiome and why they may be very similar. So, if your dog's having some issues with like stinky gas and things of that nature or stinky breath, you might want to give yourself a little check and go, do we have a little crossover there? Now, the other big thing we're going to talk about in this podcast is all about dog food, dog treats, and the chemicals that are in both of those things and why your dogs don't have salivary amylase. It only comes from their pancreas, and why you, unfortunately, as a loving pet owner, might be giving them foods that could be messing with their pancreas and causing them pancreatitis. None of the things we want to happen whatsoever, but a fascinating podcast because it's talking about, or we're talking about, the overlap between microbiomes. So, round 2 with Dr. Bessent. Let's get on to that podcast. Hey, health junkies. I have veterinarian Dr. Chris on again today, and we're going to be talking about microbiomes because our last chat, we ran out of time. We were having so much fun. And today I really want to talk about your microbiome and your pet's microbiome and how those two things kind of interact. So, Dr. Chris, welcome again to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So last time we talked all kinds of things about pets and immune systems and things of that nature, but really the microbiome was something that I'm asked a lot about it. And I know a lot of people love to let their pets lick their plates, share their food, use their utensils sometimes. And, I've seen it all. And so I always wondered does this have a connection and how does that play out for the pets and for us humans on both sides of the fence?
Yeah, I would say that a dog's microbiome is a little different than a human's in that dogs are carnivores, scavenger carnivores, where humans are omnivores. And so the microbiome or the bacteria in the gut is just a little different. But there is a recent study that came out that really showed that when humans cohabitate with dogs, that they tend to develop almost a symbiosis of their microbiomes, so that the microbiome of the dog very much reflects the microbiome of the person. So it just made me laugh when you said about sharing utensils and licking out the bowl and I'm guilty. I do the same. My dogs love it. And I've always been saying that dogs should eat healthy, wonderful food. And if I'm eating healthy, great food, I should be giving some to my pet. And it didn't even strike me until you said it about licking the bowls. I mean, obviously you're washing them afterwards, but bacteria are microscopic. And, we're petting the dogs and we're putting our bacteria on them and they're putting their bacteria on us. And it really is just, I think it's so fascinating how diverse it is and how much we've learned over the last even just 2 years. I mean, the research on the microbiome, both in people and in animals, has just been, it's probably one of the most researched topics in the last 2 years is the microbiome. It seems like we're of similar age. And so, and as a naturopath, I'm sure you've always talked about leaky gut. You've always talked about the microbiome, but I literally remember being in vet school or just recently graduated and really kind of the microbiome just always made sense to me. I literally remember a professor saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That has no effect whatsoever." And here we are now 35 years later with a huge amount of research that describes how the microbiome is a vital part of our health as well as our pets' health. So it really has come like, we've talked leaky gut for so many years, and now we're really getting the science behind it. And I'm sure in the next 10 years, we will advance tremendously in just understanding how important the microbiome is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people now, because there's so much more research and there's so much interest now, people are starting to connect the dots a little and wonder, like, if I get sick, can my pet get sick, or could they transfer things back to me? And I think it's fascinating to kind of think about, even if you're working on improving your health, could you improve the health of your pet while you're working on your microbiome? There's so many interesting things. What have you
Yeah.
found to be the case?
Say that again.
What have you found to be the case in terms of if you're sick and say, and I don't mean sick like a virus, a bug. I'm more like saying a lot of people are noticing, oh, my gut microbiome might be off. I've got bloating. I've got a little bit of gas. Maybe I have IBS. I don't know what's going on. Could that also be reflected in your pet and transfers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so massive and so diverse. And the way that we think about it right now is so crude. Like we think salmonella, E. coli, we think of that. We're not talking about the distribution of good and bad. We're not talking about the metabolites that are released from the good bacteria, metabolites that are released from the bad bacteria. We haven't even really gotten into the scope of that. So to really understand how blended we are of our microbiome to our children's or our husband or our pets, and how that all interconnects, I think is going to be such exciting stuff in the future. What I can tell you in this light of thinking crudely about things is the incidence of GI issues, dysbiosis in dogs is as rampant as it is in people. Mm-hmm. And the gut almost always. So we were laughing before we went on air, and we were talking about this Curate the Bowl. And Curate the Bowl is this really neat quiz that we do at Herbsmith, where pet parents can go on and tell me all about Brian, their dog, and then I can make recommendations looking at it from a holistic viewpoint. So it might be products that these are products I would recommend, but I might also recommend you need to see an acupuncturist, or you need to see a chiropractor, or are you sure your vet's checked for ear mites? And, just kind of helping to point people in the right direction. The incidence of dysbiosis and GI issues on those forms are crazy. So right now we've been doing it for, I think about a year. Wow. And I think I've gone through about 7,000, maybe 8,000 different Curate the Bowl quizzes. And I would say that probably 70% have some GI upset described. And it might be their primary issue, like IBD in dogs, or chronic diarrhea, or chronic vomiting in cats, or it might be a secondary thing. But what was so striking to me is that so many dogs, such a huge percentage of our population of dogs, have some gut GI upset, and it's going to reflect exactly the same as it does in people. So gurgly gut, on and off soft stool, not wanting to eat, not having great appetites, vomiting can absolutely be a part of it, but stool is a really big part of it. And so I would say it usually is not as extreme as the dog is a carrier of salmonella or E. coli. It's more subtle, and it's more like the subtle signs that we see in people. I mean, you could have dysbiosis and you're still going to work every day. You're still, having Easter with your family, but you're having this GI discomfort that goes along with it if you eat just the wrong things. And I know we talked a lot the last time about how dogs are the canary in the coal mine.
Right.
And that dogs are this kind of reflection of what's going on in people. And I would say what happens in their microbiome is exactly the same thing. So we see humans, not that your followers would eat poorly, but I mean, the Eatos of the world, Doritos, Cheetos, have become like a food group. Like in your grocery store, it's like a whole aisle now. And we see the exact same thing in animals. So dogs are scavenger carnivores, but they get fed really high carbohydrate diets that they shouldn't be fed. And they can adapt to it, so they can upregulate their amylase production, but it's always kind of teetering on the edge. That's why they get pancreatitis so often. So because they're being fed such high carbohydrate diets, they're also getting residual glyphosate in their diets as well. So to me, what's one of the worst things for microbiome is glyphosate. So what we're eating mirrors what a dog is eating, and they're getting the same glyphosate load that we're getting, if not more, because when you're feeding a high carbohydrate diet to your dogs, you're not feeding high quality. It's not organic grains that are being used. It's the byproducts that are left over after human production that then go into the kibble that's produced for animals.
Oh, that's so sad. That is so sad. And I'm glad you're saying that again, because it is something that I want folks to really hear, but also at the same time, when we eat excessive carbs, we're going to get more glyphosate too. Now, for folks to understand like what glyphosate does to the microbiome, would it be safe to say for dogs, same kind of like humans, it prevents the beneficial bacteria from living, it creates more leaky gut, things of that nature?
Yep, absolutely. In fact, some of the research that's done that kind of prove that it breaks the junctions between the enterocytes were done on dogs. So dogs are so close to humans that oftentimes they're kind of the next step up from mice. So first they're researching in vitro. So they're looking at cells in a petri dish, and then they start looking at how it affects mice, and then they take it, how does it affect dogs, and then transpose that into how does that affect people. But yeah, all the same effects that glyphosate has on people, it has on dogs as well. So not only damaging the microbiome, but also breaking the junction between the cells of the intestine, which now allows more stuff to enter, more bacteria to enter within the dog's body, and puts them in a state of stress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which, I have to look back and see, okay, what do we have as like if we think in our mind, what's the quintessential like dog treat? I think of milk bone, right? And I'm going, okay, how much carb is in a milk bone? How much is in these traditional snacks that dogs, we've been, I wouldn't want to say the word brainwash per se, but that's probably what it is, marketed to that.
Yep.
These are good snacks for dogs. So let's talk a little bit about what's not a good snack for a dog and what are like optimal options, whether they're cooked, whether they're homemade, or whether someone could find them in the store. What would be the best options?
I would say that it's realizing that they're scavenger carnivores, and that as a carnivore, they should be eating more meat. So the food pyramid of a person is lots of grains and then veggies and fruits. The food pyramid for a dog should be the opposite. It should be lots of meats and organs, and then smaller amounts of veggies and fruits, and grains to a minimum. So a milk bone, to me, like just cringed when you said it. I was like, oh. Yeah. Dogs love them because who isn't a carboholic? I mean, sugar is yummy. That's been well proven by everybody in the world. So dogs love the crunch of a milk thistle because it's like breaking through a bone. It's like crunching on a bone. and they can upregulate their amylase so they can tolerate a milk bone. But that to me is like giving your kid a Snickers bar. So if you think of a milk bone like a Snickers bar, then you would be like, okay, yeah, that's probably fine as a real treat here and there, like once a year, but not like every day. But a really healthy treat would be like a freeze-dried piece of organ meat, or a piece of broccoli, or a steamed carrot would be fabulous. That's a great treat for a dog. But beef liver and chicken hearts are great choices. There's now freeze-dried chicken necks and freeze-dried duck necks. And the beauty of that is they have to chew, and they get the beautiful bone marrow from the bones of the neck, and they get all the collagen from all the sinews, and they get the glucosamine and the hyaluronic acid from the joint fluid. So they're getting really good, healthy treats. So those are better choices. The other choice that I think is really great for dogs is berries. Yeah. So antioxidants are just as important as in pets as they are in humans. But they, like AAFCO, which is the main organization that regulates pet food, doesn't even acknowledge that pets need antioxidants at all. Like it's not even considered. So when you see a bag of dog food and it says blueberry, well, it might be a blueberry flavoring, or it might be one blueberry in a 50-pound bag. Not enough. That has been heavily heat treated. So dogs don't get the antioxidants they need, and therefore have all this oxidative stress. And I'm assuming it's the same in people. I'm sure it is, that as you age, your own endogenous production of antioxidants goes down. So it's even more important that you have a dietary source of antioxidants. And the same thing holds true for our pets. So as that dachshund is now getting to be 10, 11, 12, it's really important that they get some healthy, fresh, organic blueberries or raspberries, or getting a source of antioxidants from their food. And because their food pyramid is different, and the majority of their food should be meat, so meat and organs, it's important that the fruits or vegetables that they get are as nutrient packed as possible. So that's why I'm such a lover of blueberries and raspberries and strawberries, and just berries just in general, as long as they're clean, of course, but berries just in general, to be able to add antioxidants to their diet. So use those as treats.
Ooh, I know my guy Brian will love that, because he is always all over me when I have strawberries or berries in particular. And he, it's fun because they're like perfect size to just throw in play catch too with them. Yeah. So no, those are perfect. Yeah, I always, I had a little insider knowledge on the milk bone side of things, but it is something that, you go to the bank, and the bank's like, hey, can we give your dog this like brightly colored strange milk bone? And you're like,
no, thank you.
And that's the other thing that I think a lot of people probably run up against, is if they take the dog with them, the dog already knows what's going to happen. So what we did is we have a whole package of our treats in my dog loves the freeze-dried lung. And so I have that in my console of the car. And so I will not tell the person no, but I will give it, he thinks.
Switch it out.
Do a swap. Brian has been fooled for years now on that one.
Hopefully he's not listening.
Yeah. Oh, he's outside.
Fabulous.
He's having fun. So tell us a little bit about, with pets. Well, let's go back. With humans, we have all this testing. We can do stool testing to see what our whole microbiome is about. We can do organic acid testing to see what metabolites we have. Do those things exist for dogs yet? Is there anything like
I
that?
do. Yeah. There's a number of companies that do microbiome testing on dogs, and you'll send some stool sample in just like you would for a person, and they'll give you a whole wonderful profile of the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, what their distribution is within the gut. So yeah, but that testing is very few and far between. It is not hit the mainstream, so it's not something an average vet would recommend. An average vet, so when you go to the vet in the spring or once a year for your dog's checkup and you bring a stool sample, they're not checking for microbiome. They're checking for parasites. So for roundworms or tapeworms, they're looking for big parasites. And that kind of goes to the whole crude part of it, is that we can talk about salmonella and E. coli, and we can talk about roundworms and tapeworms and really big, obvious badnesses. But your regular vet's definitely not going to be sending that out for a good microbiome screen. So that's really kind of up to the pet parent to be able to do it. But, with the internet and Instagram and Facebook, you can find these people all over the place. And then they do a really neat thing. And I'm not sure if you do this for people or not, because I haven't heard of it, but it's a fecal microbiome transfer. So they take healthy dogs and that have a really good balanced microbiome, who are being fed well, young, vibrant, healthy dogs. And then they'll take that stool sample and then match it to the person or the dog that they just evaluated, and then send them capsules of essentially freeze-dried poop cells or poop that has the bacteria in it. And then every day that you're giving your dog that capsule, you're re-inoculating their gut with good bacteria. And that has been really, in some dogs, it's crazy impressive, meaning that a lifelong of IBD, a lifelong history of dysbiosis, and by re-inoculating their gut with the flora from another dog is enough to just completely change their flora and really kind of jumpstart a good microbiome. And then some dogs, it doesn't do anything at all. So it kind of is like most things in natural medicine. If you really need it, it's amazing. And if it's not something that you really need, not quite so amazing.
Put that in a great perspective. I think a lot of people wonder, like, oh, is there something wrong with my body and it didn't work because of me? And it's like, no, just not the right thing. Haven't found the right thing. And yes, fecal transplants are a thing for adults, humans. And in that case, it's usually because to get insurance to cover it has to be a Clostridium difficile type, so it's C. diff chronic thing. Otherwise, it's not just widely available, where it sounds like dogs don't have to meet a criteria to be able to get this.
Nope, not at all. I mean, it's big business now. There's a number of companies out there that they do the testing, and then they essentially prescribe the right capsules for that dog to rebalance their microbiome. You and I know that it's more in depth than that.
Sure.
Because you could have these FMTs, you could have these fecal microbiotic transplants, but then you're still eating the same glyphosate every day. It just gets damaged. So there's so much more to it, but at least it's kind of a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like there needs to be a whole program. If someone's going to have that for their dog, they need to be switching off the regular conventional food. There's, kind of like what we do with humans, if you're going to do something like that and spend the money on it, because I'm sure it's not cheap. It's where to go. Now, another question that I've had, and I know other people have asked as well, food allergy testing for dogs. Is it a thing? Is it legit? And what do you think about it? It's kind of my thought process.
I would say it's a tool. So it is readily available, and it's usually by blood. So you have a blood sample done, and then you're sending that serum off to be tested. and then you'll come back and have the analysis that they're allergic to X, Y, and Z. And then you really need to do a food trial to see it. And to me, the way I think of it is it's still pretty crude.
Yeah.
So if they say I'm allergic to beef, are you allergic to beef that is harvested from a cow that was raised in a feedlot? So that cow was fed a heavily grain diet and was under horrendous stress. And then the meat that your animal is eating is now as filled with adrenaline, filled with endorphins, filled with how many other bad things in that meat. So is it truly the beef, or is it something about that stressed beef? So I always say to my clients, okay, great, that's a tool that we kind of gets us in a ballpark. So now let's take that tool and do some trials with it. So let's get them on a non-beef diet. Let's say it's beef. Get them on a non-beef diet and see how they do. Okay, they're doing better. Great. So we could either decide I'm never going to feed beef again, or we could decide let's try some grass-fed beef in a low stress environment. let's use some beef that was raised on a farm where it's one of 50 cattle on the farm, and so they're happily eating grass out in their pastures, and then when they're slaughtered, it's quick and they're not stressed by it. They're slaughtered there on the farm. Let's try that beef and see how they do with it. If they do well with that, then you can kind of take it down the next step. Okay, well, is it just grass-fed beef, or was it that it was low stress? And then that gets a whole into biogenic amines. I don't know if people have really gotten into that very much, but for pets, that when the FDA, let's say the FDA says beef is fine, okay, but beef could be anything from 4D meat, dead, down, diseased, dying, a carcass that has been sitting in a farmyard for 3 days before it goes to the rendering plant to be ground up and then cooked and cooked and cooked and made into beef meal. So when it says beef on the label, it could be anything from wholesome, healthy, grass-fed beef from a cow that was happy in its pasture to feedlot, to dead, down, diseased, and dying, to heavily rendered product. All of that is equal in pet food. Where biogenic amines could come in is if you test your food for biogenic amines, you can test, and biogenic amines are like cadaversin and putrescin. They're chemicals that happen in meat when meat spoils. And even if you subject that meat to high temperatures, it doesn't get rid of those ingredients or those basic chemicals. Those basic chemicals stay. So if you test for biogenic amines and it is high, and it's crazy how much is allowed. It's allowed 50 on a biogenic amine index is the beginning of what's considered spoiled meat. But healthy, vibrant food that most humans would eat is like less than 1. Wow. But all the way up to 50 would still be considered okay for pets. So and histamine is another one of these biogenic amines. So is it that dog was truly allergic to beef, or was it being fed a heavily rendered beef meal that's really high in putrescin and cardavicins and histamine, and that's what they're having the reaction to? And so that just kind of brings up like this whole other more in-depth thought process into what we're feeding to our pets. So when they say they have a food allergy, to get back to the original question, when they say they have a food allergy, to me, that's just the start. That's just the beginning. And then we need to kind of move deeper and deeper to find out really what's going on with them.
Oh man. I've thought about that for humans too. And the food sensitivity testing isn't my number one go-to because I feel like it ends up we have to go deeper anyway. And what you just brought up, I mean, it's just disgusting. It makes me so sad. It makes me so sad. And also has me kind of on this thought of going like, okay, if that's what's acceptable for the meats and say a dog doesn't want to eat it, maybe there's a reason your dog doesn't like their food, is kind of what I'm thinking.
Yep, because their sense of smell is like 10,000 times our scent. So if we smell something, we might not smell it, but if a dog smells it, I mean, they have like this, if you were to look at the superhero qualities for a dog, it's their nose. That dogs see the world through scent. And so if they're smelling it and it smells bad, we would not even know because ours is not nearly as sensitive as a dog's sense of smell. And I would qualify that with for your viewers. If it says meat meal, so MEAL on the ingredient deck, so let's say it says beef meal, that means it's a heavily rendered product. So where you could have dead, down, disease, dying, you could have all of that. It could just be a carcass. You could have all of that going into the meat meal. Wow. If it just says beef without the meal afterwards, it still is a really wide range because 4D meat, so meat dead, down, and disease and dying, is still considered totally acceptable in the pet food industry. And how do you know that? You
don't.
It's hard to know. I think the best is, does your dog love it? Do they look good eating it? Have other pets done well eating it? And then trusting the company and how much transparency they have.
Yeah. Which is such a hard thing because I think a lot of us have, and you know, when I first ended up having pets in my early 20s, I didn't know any better. You know, I'm going off of what I see on TV.
100%.
You know? And then it came when I was going through naturopath school, part of what paid for my school is I worked for a vendor for dog food, which interesting turn of things. But I was working for ones that were at that time. Now I don't think I would even trust their products, but at that time they were trying to change the thought process and kind of trying to get away from kibble, things of that nature. And that's where I started to learn a little bit, but I feel like not the average person is just seeing what's put out over and over again in the media. Then we have famous people who have their dog food lines that, yeesh.
Right. It's just a licensure. And yeah, and I think the other hard part for the consumer is when you look at a bag of pet food and it has a beautiful piece of chicken breast on it, you think that's in that bag, right? I mean, there's no way the FDA would let us be deceived like that. But the truth of the matter is, if there is the DNA of chicken in that bag, they can put that beautiful picture on. Oh. If there's the DNA, if one blueberry was put into that 50-pound bag, they can have blueberries all over the package. That's the problem, is that I literally have, knowing what I know, walk down the aisle of my local grocery store and look and go through the dog food aisle. And when I look at them, I think, that's not really that bad. Even I think that's not really that bad. And then I read the ingredient deck and I'm like, yeah, this is terrible. But the average pet owner, they don't want to have to study pet food, right? Most people just want their animal to be happy and healthy and vibrant. The nice thing is there's now some really great websites out there. And one of my favorite, and I think that you would like it and your viewers would like it as well, is Susan Thixton, and it's Thixton.
Okay.
She produces a list of pet foods that she's qualified. So what she does is she literally comes to the manufacturer and says, well, if you apply to her to be on her list, she will require certificate of analysis of your ingredients. She'll require batch records. She'll require you to attest to different things. She will make sure that it's the quality of food that a human would eat, not what I was talking before. It gets called feed grade. So if you go to Susan Thixton, and it's called Truth About Pet Food, she is amazing. And she does all the research, and literally we have to provide her documentation. So she keeps manufacturers honest. And you're not going to see Purina or Nutro on that list. You're going to find on that list is people who are really doing it right and are really providing really good quality food. And therefore, you don't have to become the the pet food guru.
I mean, it's incredibly helpful because I mean, a lot of people just, even in my practice are like, just tell me what to buy. Tell me what brands to look at. And I think for pets, I think that's where it comes down to, because I've read the Forever Dog. I've looked at raw food. I've went down the different forums and the Facebook groups, and like we talked about our first podcast, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have time, even to like meal prep myself, plus my dog, plus everything. What can I do, to get the closest to it? So this is a great resource. Of course, I'm guessing a lot about her because your dog food products are
correct. Yeah, we have the Simple Food Project, and the Simple Food Project, and now Medica's veterinary diets have been on Susan's list from the very beginning. And just because I so appreciate that, because I can say it till I'm blue in my face that we're different. But until biogenic amines, we didn't really have a quantitative test to be able to say the difference. And now we do. So I'm hoping that could be a bigger part of pet food in the future, and that consumers will start asking for it. At this point, I'm probably the only veterinarian in the world talking about it, because it's gonna blow a lot of really poor quality ingredients out of the water, and actually give pet parents numbers that they can discern on the quality of the meats. But until then, Susan Thixton's fabulous.
Okay.
The other thing that I really wanted to cover today, and I know that you have probably more questions, but how important the microbiome is to everything else in a pet's body. Mm-hmm. So how important the microbiome is for the immune system, that's a given. But also how important it is for mental health. So the epidemic of anxiety and mental health issues that we see in people absolutely is mirrored in dogs as well. So anxiety is a huge issue for pets. And I think a big part of it is their microbiome. So serotonin, 90% of serotonin is produced within the gut. Exact same thing happens in pets that do in people. And now the research where they're talking about how there's the gut kidney axis, amazing, and the gut skin axis, and the gut oral microbiome axis. I mean, just every time, every part of a pet, the microbiome affects in some way. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, we're still in the infancy of really understanding it. But I can't tell you how much more I personally recommend either the FMTs, the transplants, or the testing, or just going on a general good across the board probiotic, how increasing fiber matters so much. So it's amazing to me how much I recommend assistance for the microbiome for everything from liver disease to kidney disease to chronic skin allergies and hot spots in dogs to terrible bad breath and excessive tartar that happens in the mouth of a dog. Because again, if you go to the mouth, oh my gosh, dogs don't have salivary amylase like people do. Cats have none. So they're pure obligate carnivores. They have no salivary amylase. Dogs have a small amount of it, but they can't really upregulate their salivary amylase. They can upregulate their pancreatic release of amylase. And so And so dogs that are eating a high carbohydrate diet, when they chew on that milk bone, now what you're doing is you're feeding the bad bacteria within that dog's mouth.
Oh, wow.
And when you're feeding the bad bacteria within that dog's mouth, you're getting that foul smell, you're getting that development of the biofilm and the tartar that's being laid down, because they can't digest the sugar that they're eating that's sitting in their mouth. So part of, like, for me, for dental health, is trying to help correct the microbiome of their mouth.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Oh my goodness. You know, I mean, same transfer to humans, right? We have to think about how even our oral microbiome has an impact. And with the dogs, I didn't realize that the salivary amylase is only coming from the pancreas. So that kind of connects back why the pancreatitis is such a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't it amazing? I think that pancreatitis is such an issue for dogs because they're always teetering on the edge of being able to tolerate high carbohydrate diets. And so because people are like, oh, they're domesticated and they've been eating like humans for all these years, and their genome has changed accordingly. I'm like, I don't think so. I think that they have certain protective mechanisms in their body that allow them to be able to survive through what I would consider nutritional abuse, that they can upregulate their amylase. But the pancreas is always teetering on the edge of being able to just, like, what's the straw that broke the camel's back?
Right, right. You know, it's so common. I mean, I just had a friend the other day tell me how they had to take their dog in pancreatitis, and this is when I was like, okay, you've got to listen to my recording. Chris, because these are the things that are like real deal factors. And nevertheless, you know, there's something that a lot of people aren't really thinking about. They're giving the dogs, and I know we talked about it last time, the little greenies and things of that nature to work on. And it's like, no, we need to go back to basics and work on the microbiome. So at this point, because I know that when I put in for Brian, I was talking about his gut bugs, and we had talked about, not we had talked about, but you had messaged me about, yes, the milk thistle for sure to help with glyphosate, and then probiotics were on there. And I think for a lot of folks, one of the big factors, even as humans trying to figure out what probiotics are good, I know that there's got to be good ones for dogs. What do you recommend for folks? I know you have your own company. Love for you to kind of share what you guys have and kind of go from there too.
Yeah, I would say certainly the state of the art would be to have the stool tested and see what distribution of bacteria they already have in their gut, and good to bad, and of the good, which ones are there. And then choosing probiotics accordingly, or having the fecal transplant accordingly. But that changes too. So I kind of feel like probiotics should be a diversity, and let's let the body figure it out. And let's provide not only lactobacillus and bacillus species and Saccharomyces. Let's provide a whole bunch of different probiotics. So maybe it's mine that I'm using 1 month. Maybe the next month you do a kimchi or a kombucha or something else. And I would say that part of the microbiome work for animals is all sorts of really cool fermented products. So there's fermented goat's milk, and there's fermented kimchi for dogs, and there's all sorts of, even becoming more and more fermented products that are available for dogs that add yet one more way to continually inoculate the gut. And I think that's when we think of things, we think like, you're sick and we're going to make it better. And in the microbiome, it's really not like that, right? It's a constant support that you need for the microbiome. It's if you eat poorly for a weekend, it doesn't blow you out of the water, But if you eat poorly for a year, it does. And so if you eat poorly for the weekend and then you have yogurt and some fermented kimchi over the week and you take some probiotic supplements, you're going to rebalance that again. You increase the fiber in your diet. You get back to a healthy diet again. I think that is kind of the best way. Dogs eat dirt all the time, right? And people are like, oh my God, he's eating dirt. I'm like, so that's okay. To me, if it's excessive, I'm not, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If it's excessive and they're eating rocks and puppies do that, and then they block their intestine, that's a whole different deal. But if they get dirt on their paws and they lick their paws off, that's okay. That's like inoculating their gut with good bacteria. You could have bad bacteria, but you could also have good bacteria in it. When they eat fruits and vegetables, they're not sterilized fruits and vegetables. If you're pulling a carrot from your garden and it still has a little bit of dirt on it and your dog eats it, great. That's another way of this just constantly supporting the microbiome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people forget is it's not like, oh, I'm going to take this probiotic and get rid of the diarrhea in myself or the dog. It's an ongoing process to nurture and take care of that microbiome.
So. Yeah. There's been some really cool research where they looked at dogs that were being fed a heavily processed kibble diet and then other dogs that were being fed a raw diet. And the dogs that were fed a raw diet not only had good microbiomes, but they had a huge diversity of the microbiome. So they had, thousands of different species and subspecies of bacteria within their gut. And that goes to the idea of living food versus dead food. And so heavily processed dead food versus healthy, vibrant food that has some good bacteria on it as well. And I wouldn't, again, throw out the baby with the bathwater. If a food has to be packaged and has to ship from, say, our plant to a warehouse, then finally to a store, then finally to a pet parent, and then sits in your cupboard for 3 weeks and then is fed to your dog, yeah, you can't have bacteria in that food because it is going to replicate within that food. But if they're eating fresh berries or fresh fruits or vegetables, or if you went to your butcher and got freshly butchered organ meat, wow, that's a great choice.
Yeah. Oh man, I love chatting with you because I always learn so much, and I know that a lot of folks are going to eat this one up, no pun intended at all.
That was good.
on everything for the dogs, but also for themselves, because folks, this is us just as much as doggos. So could you give us a rundown of, once again, of your brand for folks to do the quiz, so the Herbsmith, so that they can learn about what supplementation their dog might need, and then also about your brand for the food, because I think a lot of folks are going to be very curious, and I'll add in Susan Thixton for everybody too.
Fabulous. So I started out with supplements because I am well-versed in Chinese medicine and just love Chinese herbs. And so Herbsmith, and it's herbsmithinc.com, is supplements for dogs, but also herbal supplements. So if your dog has allergies, we have really amazing, fabulous Chinese herbs that bring down heat and inflammation. So on the Herbsmith website, you can do a curate the bowl, which is basically like you did with Brian, where you tell me all the information about your dog and what you're concerned about and what you need help with. I literally evaluate all of those every day and then give you recommendations. It might be, use product ABC. It might be, go to the chiropractor, or, I'll kind of give you my perspective from a holistic veterinary perspective. So that's Herbsmith, and those are supplements. And those could be just to support a happy, healthy dog like Brian. It could also be for dogs that have particular issues that could go deeper into Chinese medicine. Then we also have the Simple Food Project, and the Simple Food Project is freeze-dried whole food for dogs. So it's based on a species-appropriate diet, high meat content, and fabulous organs, but then we also have ground bone and then organic fruits and vegetables, and no grains. So really low carbohydrate, species appropriate, fabulous diets that you could use as just a topper, or you could use it as treats, or it's complete and balanced, so you could use it as a whole food as well. And that's for cats and for dogs. So we have both. And then we just recently launched Medicus veterinary diets, which is so cool. It's like 10 years in the making, but it is whole food diets for sick pets. So a pet that has a kidney disease and they need a nutrient profile that's lower in phosphorus, because now the kidney can't excrete the phosphorus. So you need a lower dietary consumption of phosphorus. So we developed whole food diets made of real food, but made them so that they're lower in phosphorus, and then used like ground eggshell and chitosan that are natural whole food phosphorus binders, and put that in the food. So now you can feed your pet good their whole lives. And then if they get sick for some reason, there's an option out there that sticks with the idea that whole food has this amazing synergy of so much more than we physically truly understand about the benefits of whole foods. So that's Medicus veterinary diets.
Oh, wow. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
It's something that we all definitely are.
It's super exciting. It's kind of what I've done. I practiced veterinary medicine for 35 years and saw things that I thought needed to be available to the average pet parent. And it was one way for me to contact more pets and be a positive influence in their life, that like I'm probably never physically going to meet Brian, but I could have a positive influence on his life, and then partnered with really good pet stores that also can do it, and fabulous people like you guys who can then educate others that these options are available.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am all in on it and definitely support your mission 100%. Well, thanks again, Dr. Chris, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I have no doubt that at some time in the future, we're probably going to have another chat, because I'll come up with something that I want to learn about.
That's fabulous. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. And I'm just always happy to share what we can do to make pets healthier.
Thank you. Because boy, I'm shooting for my guy to at least beat 12. My last one lasted to 12. So I'm shooting for at least 15, 16, maybe.
You can do it, and good quality too.
That's hugely important. Hugely important. Thank you.
Hey, Health Junkies, are you feeling just off? Feeling like you're aging a little bit faster than you want to, and wondering what in the world is up? Hey, I might have some answers for you and some direction. If you want to chat with me, I am offering complimentary calls right now. You can head over to Dr. spelled out JKrausend.com. Take my quiz, click on the schedule a chat, and let's talk and see if we can get you in the right direction. And if I'm able to help you, I'm going to let you know. Otherwise, I'm going to help you find what you're looking for. Head over to drjkrausend.com and check it out now. Hey, fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.